This section will instruct the builder to install instrument panel, FADEX system and digital display monitor, rotor tack sender, wiring harness, engine control unit, ignition modules, relay board, manifold barometric sensors, spark plug wires, and overhead switch panel. Locate the following components. Reference the construction print E23-2000 rotor tack sensor, E35-2000 wiring harness, and E35-2001 wiring diagram. Do not connect the cables to the battery until all of the wiring has been completed. At different stages of this section, it will be necessary to install the tub, seat back, and floor pan for the routing of the electrical wires and installation of the instruments. The wiring should be secured with wire ties as necessary. Do not stretch the wires tight, but allow some flexibility between components. Wires that are under tension may pull out of the connector. Before plugging in connectors, inspect for any debris or foreign material inside the plug and remove if necessary. Check to make sure the pins are straight. Never force a plug into the matching socket or connector. Make sure the weather-tight seals are in place on the plugs that are equipped with them. Important, secure all wiring away from the main shaft. This is the instrument mounting panel for the exec 162F as received from Rotorway. Wax the back side of the panel to prevent the fiberglass resin from sticking. Clean with acetone the inside surface of the instrument pod, where the fiberglass angles will be secured. Fit the instrument panel into the opening of the pod and clamp it into the desired location. Note the instrument panel should be recessed about 1/2 inch into the pod from the edge of the opening to the face of the panel. This provides room for the rubber molding to be mounted around the edge of the pod. Cut the fiberglass angle material E32-3140 into 1 1/4 inch lengths. You will need to cut 12 pieces. Position the fiberglass angles on the inside wall of the pod corresponding to the 12 mounting hole locations on the panel as shown. Secure the fiberglass angles to the inside wall of the pod using the resin and mat supplied. This is another view showing the angles secured to the floor pan pod. After the resin has cured, drill the 12 mounting holes through the instrument panel and angle brackets. Use clecos and install nut plates on the fiberglass angles as shown. Trim any fiberglass angles that may interfere with instrument or gauge mounting screws. Measure the diameter of the gauge and use the appropriate hole saw. Use a piece of scrap material to verify the fit of the gauge. Drill the holes and install the full-range tack, voltmeter and fuel pressure gauge on the floor pan behind the pedals, facing the pilot as shown.
Secure the gauges with the supplied hardware.
Install the hour meter on the side of the instrument pod. Make sure the hour meter's location does not interfere with other gauges.
This is the digital display monitor as received from Rotorway International.
Cut out the fiberglass display mounting angle, E32-1390, into 4 equal pieces to hold the digital display in place. Drill the mounting holes through the instrument panel and the angles. Then pop rivet the nut plates to each mounting angle. Verify the fit by securing the angles and monitor to the panel with 832 screws. Note, if necessary, file or sand the corners of the opening in the instrument panel so that the digital display will fit through. The display monitor should extend out from the face of the panel slightly. Note, it is recommended that this area should be cut out for the avionics that you plan to install before installing the black fabric. Cover the panel with the black panel fabric. Trim the fabric as required, then mount the instruments. When trimming the black fabric for the digital monitor display opening, allow the fabric to overlap the edge of the opening as shown. On final install, glue the rubber molding around the edge of the pod opening. Reference the construction print E23-2000 Rotorway sensor mount for hole diameters and location for the E36-9000 Rotorway sender mount weldment. Also reference the instruction sheet that is supplied with the Rotorway. Mount the Rotorway sender under the hood bracket as shown. Retorque the bolt. Install the magnets on the main shaft. The magnets must clear the sensor by 1/16 of an inch or less.
Install the supplied wiring harness with the Rotorway sensor.
To minimize interference from electrical system and to receive a steady reading from the sender to the tack, route the wires from the sender to the tack down the pilot side of the airframe.
Note, you will need to shorten the cable and install the 4-pin Molex connector later.
Mount the starter relay to the pilot side fuel tank bracket using the supplied bolt and the one bolt securing the tank strap as shown.
This is the main wiring harness as received from Rotorway.
Install the main wiring harness on the airframe. Route the main harness beginning with plugs 1 and 2 at this location, and then down the passenger side as shown. Note, hold the wiring in place with as few wire ties until final position has been determined. Then secure with as many wire ties as needed. Route the wires with instrument plugs number 3, number 4, and number 5 to the instrument panel along the front landing gear tube. Route the wires to the outside of the airframe tube to prevent interference with the seat back.
This is the 6-wire harness as received from Rotorway.
Route the smaller harness with the 6 wires plug R from the overhead switch panel down the pilot side to the relay board. Route the start button plug number 11 and start a relay wire down the pilot side of the airframe as shown. Connect wire number 11 to terminal number 4 in the starter relay as shown. Route this positive cable from the battery positive terminal to the positive terminal on the starter motor behind the intake manifolds as shown.
Locate the starter relay to starter motor wires.
Secure the cable and the positive wire from the starter relay to this terminal. Connect the red wire to terminal number 3 on the starter relay. Connect the white wire to terminal number 1 on the starter relay. Then connect this wire to the quick disconnect on the starter. Connect this negative cable from the engine mounting bolt to the negative terminal on the starter as shown. Connect the negative of the main wire harness to the engine mount bolt also. Make sure these cables do not contact any of the fuel lines. Secure with wire ties if necessary. These are the parts to install the start button in the pilot's cyclic handle. Drill the hole for the starter button in the pilot's cyclic handle. Recess the mount to help prevent accidental engagement of the starter when the engine is running. With the supplied 20-gauge wire, feed 2 pieces up the cyclic stick through the opening of the cyclic handle and solder the leads to the switch. Make sure to install heat shrink to the terminals on the switch. Install the female Molex connector and female pin terminals for plug number 11 and connect the start button to the main wiring harness as shown.
Install a 4-wire Molex connector to the supplied tachometer cable. Follow the instructions for the proper wire polarity. Install and solder the terminals to the end of the wires with heat shrink. Then install the male and female Molex connectors. Label a connector number 6.
Route and connect these wires to the alternator. Connect leads number 12 and number 31 to the positive terminal on the alternator. Connect this male pin terminal number 5 to the lead and insulator you installed when mounting the alternator. Secure the wires to the airframe tube as shown so they will not come in contact with the pulleys or belt. Install the mating terminals and their insulators to the leads on the fuel tank sending unit and connect them to plug number 9 and the single-pin male plug for the ground to the wiring harness.
Reference the wiring schematic to install the terminals in the connectors.
Note the ground ring terminal is secured to the collective spring eye bolt.
This is the FADEC wiring harness as received from Rotorway.
Install the FADEC wiring harness. Secure the harness to the cross tube as shown. Note, when installing the seat back, make sure the wiring harness is not pinched between the seat back and the cross tube. Make sure the weather-tight seals are in place on the plugs that are equipped with them. Then use a light film of silicone lubricant on the seals before installing them. Remember, before installing a connector, inspect for any debris or foreign material inside the plug and make sure the pins are straight and haven't been damaged. The connectors for the ignition senders on the engine are joined together for shipping. Disconnect them from each other and connect them to the harness as shown.
Connect the FADEC harness to the main wiring harness at this connector.
Plug in the connectors to the throttle position sensors. The primary number 1 is aft, and the secondary number 2 is forward. Plug in the connectors to the primary fuel injectors. It will be necessary to rotate the injectors slightly to install the connectors. Install the number 1 plug on the upper injector and the number 2 plug on the lower injector on each side of the engine. Notice the final position of the primary fuel injectors. The connectors must not bind against the intake manifold runners on the engine. Plug in the connector to the water temperature sensor located on the pilot side of the engine. Plug in the connectors to the secondary fuel injectors. Plug in the connector to the air temperature sensor as shown. This is the ECU, engine control unit, as received from Rotorway. Make certain this control number matches your engine number. Hand twist the drill bit to open up the rubber slightly so that the screws will thread all the way into the vibration dampeners. Be careful not to damage the threads. To mount the ECU, the engine control unit, to the panel, screw the vibration dampeners into the ECU first, then attach the ECU to the seat back passenger's inspection panel with the button head screws. Note, do not use washers under the heads of these screws. Using template E35-2, cut out and drill the ignition module backing plate. The holes must be loose enough so that the bolts do not bind. Ignition packs and ground wires and straps as received from Rotorway. The packs must sit flat against the backing plate without binding or twisting. When the packs fit properly, apply a film of dielectric grease between the ignition packs and the backing plate and between the plate and the inspection panel. Insert the bolts from the cabin side of the panel. Again, do not install washers under the heads of these bolts. Install the ground strap on the 4 lower bolts. Connect the 1-pin leads as shown. These leads will connect to FADEC wiring harness. Connect the insulated ground strap and the single-pin wire lead as shown. Note, the insulated ground strap will be connected to the airframe on the engine mount bolt. Connect the end of the ground strap between the vibration dampener and the case of ECU as shown. Gradually tighten the bolts, alternating from one to another until snug. Finally, tighten the bolts to 75 inch-pounds. The FADAC relay board harness is fully assembled for ease of installation. Using template E32-1 as a guide, mount the assembled unit on the back of the pilot's inspection panel. Attach the ground wires to the relay bolt as shown on template E32-1. Use a thin lock nut on this bolt. Use the smaller number 8 washers in the recessed screw holes on the secondary control unit as shown. Install the nuts on this side. Use the regular number 8 washers on the other side of the panel under the heads of the screws. Note, washers are not used under the heads of any other bolts on the relay board. The fuel pump should have been mounted so that the black negative terminals are facing toward each other. Attach the black leads to the black negative terminals and the red positive leads to the yellow terminals. Use a light film of silicone lubricant on the fuel pump connectors as shown. This will help seat the connectors properly. Install the rubber boots and the weather-tight seals. Screw the oil pressure pickup fitting into the hose fitting at the oil filter mount. Then connect the nylon oil pressure line from the fitting and route the line along the passenger side to the front of the airframe. Connect the nylon manifold pressure line from the fitting on the plenum and route the line to the front of the ship as shown. Install the fuel pressure sending unit into the pressure regulator using Teflon tape on the pipe threads. Plug the connector into the fuel pressure sensor. Shorten the wires to the correct length and install the 4 wires in the 4-pin plug provided. Reference the construction print E35-2000 for the correct pin locations. Locate and route the wires from oil temperature sender and the water temperature sender to the area of the positive side of the battery. Verify the length and cut the wires to fit connector number 7. Reference the construction print for pin locations in the plug. Install the Molex connector. Install the spark plug wires. Route them from cylinders number 1 and number 2 on the pilot side under the intake runners and plenum to the ignition packs. Before installing each spark plug wire, look inside the boot and verify that the metal end is in the proper position. When the wire is installed either to the coil or the spark plug, it should snap into place and feel solidly attached. Route the wires from cylinders 3 and 4 on the passenger side over the runners. Note, make sure this fuel hose has a rubber hose or heat shrink material covering the steel braided portion to prevent the braided hose from wearing through the spark plug wires. Use the spark plug wire separators as necessary. Wiring must be very well supported and not allowed to chafe or vibrate excessively. No spark plug wires can be pulled tight. Some torque movement of the engine will occur and the wires must have enough slack to move with the engine. The spark plug wires are labeled to indicate which ends attach to the ignition packs. Reference the engine manual for the correct connection for the spark plug wires. Mark or label the wire numbers on the back of the upper panel for future reference. Install the seat back and secure it to the airframe. Make sure to keep the wires and pressure lines clear of the seat back where it contacts the airframe. Route and connect the plugs number 16, number 17, and number 18 from the FADEC relay harness to the airframe wiring harness on the pilot side as shown. Secure the wires to the Zeus springs with wire ties. Make sure the wires do not interfere with the operation of the Zeus buttons.
Route the digital display monitor cable from the ECU to the front of the ship.
Plug in the connector to the ECU. Do not force the plug, it should push in easily by hand. After the plug is seated, hand tighten the screws that hold it in place. Connect the ground wire to the single connector as shown. Plug in the connector to the ECU.
Plug in the spark plug wires to the ignition packs. Verify the plug wire is on the correct terminal and the wire spacing is correct. Then make sure each plug wire is solidly connected.
When the wire is installed either to the coil or the spark plug, it should snap into place and feel solidly attached. Warning: never crank, start, or run the engine with any of the spark plug wires disconnected from either the ignition pack or the plugs.
Connect the FADEC harness to the ignition packs.
Using template E35-1, make the manifold barometric sensor bracket. Assemble the manifold and barometric pressure sensors on the bracket as shown. Drill through the bolt holes if necessary with a 13/64" drill to open them up slightly. Note, both sensors are the same. Assign the sensors as shown. Mount the sensors and bracket to the seat back on the passenger side as shown here. Connect the hose from the manifold pressure sensor to the plenum and secure it with the plastic hose clamps. Be sure the sensors do not contact the fuel tank, and there is clearance between the plug and the body panel.
This is the instrument wiring harness as received from Rotorway.
Install the instrument wiring harness leads to the full range tach, voltage meter, fuel pressure gauge, and hour meter before installing the floor pan. Lay the rest of the harness through the opening of the instrument pod as shown. Position the instrument panel face down on the floor pan and connect all of the plugs, leads, and pressure lines to the instruments referencing the construction prints.
Connect the manifold and oil pressure lines to the gauges.
It will be necessary later to bleed all of the air out of the oil pressure line. To install the overhead switch panel, it will be necessary to install the upper cowlings with the cabin interiors and roof panel. Fit the switch panel to the switch panel cover. Cut an opening in the cabin roof panel 3/4 of an inch smaller than the overhead switch panel on all sides. Make a template for positioning. Fit the switch panel to the cabin roof using clecos. On final install, mount the switch panel to the roof panel on the body using nut plates on the cover. You may paint the screws and washers black to match the switch panel surface. Install the fiberglass cover over the switch panel and cut a hole in the rear of the cover to route the wires through. Plug the connectors into the airframe harness. On final installation, seal the fiberglass cover with silicone. Important, secure all wiring away from the main shaft. Using template E25-2, cut out and drill the inertia switch bracket. Mount the inertia switches to the bracket. Install the bracket underneath the main bearing flange, using the two front 3/8" bolts that hold the flange to the hood bracket. Plug in the connectors from the switches to the wiring harness. Remember to secure the wires away from the main shaft. The battery for the exec 162F is shipped dry, without electrolyte. This is a common product that can be obtained from virtually any local auto parts store. Follow the battery manufacturer's instruction for putting the battery in service. Do not connect the cables to the battery until all of the wiring has been completed.
This section will instruct the builder to reinstall the tub, floor pan and seat back brace tube, seat belts, cabin comfort components, fuel valve push-pull cable, clutch handle, and the pitot tube. Locate the following components. These are the seat belts as received from Rotorway. At this time, remove the fuel tanks and install the seat back. Position the seat upholstery in the seat back to verify the seat belt slot openings. Mark and cut slots in the seat back bottom where each of the seat belts come through as shown. This shows the seat belts in position through the seat back openings. This shows the opening at the top of the seat back for both shoulder harnesses. Wrap both shoulder straps around the 1 1/2" vertical airframe tube, just above the drive mount tubes. You may use both buckles, one for each strap, or use only one buckle for both straps on each side. It will be necessary to open the slots in the buckle with a file to allow both straps to fit through. Make sure to keep the wiring harness outside of the seat belt straps. Keep the buckle location to the inside of the airframe to prevent any interference between the buckle and the fuel tanks. On the pilot side, drill a 1/4 inch bolt hole in this location. Bolt the belt to the airframe. Reinstall the seat back on the airframe. Bolt the pilot and passenger inboard lap belts to the airframe cross tube, using the same bolts that hold the back of the seat in place. Important, make sure there is no interference between the buckles and the collective handle when raised. Using template E30-2, cut out the radiator collector. Bend the sides of the radiator collector first. If you do not have a sheet metal brake, you can use a vise and wood to bend the part. Shape and bend the end. Use the template to cut and shape the collector collar. Drill and install the pop rivets to hold the collector's shape. Install 4 832 nut plates, one in each corner as shown, to fasten the collector to the fiberglass fan shroud. Shape the collector collar, bending every other ear at a 90-degree angle as shown. Insert the collar in the hole of the radiator collector and bend the other ears 90 degrees on the inside of the collector. Trim any points of the ears that extend beyond the edges. Glue a 2-inch long strip of 1/4 inch channel rubber molding to the edge of the collector as shown. Make a cardboard template of the end of the collector. On final installation, apply some foam rubber stripping to the edges of the collector where it will contact the radiator. Mount the collector on the inside of the shroud on the passenger side, approximately 1 1/2 inches behind the front of the shroud. This shows the collector mounted to the shroud and secured with 4 832 screws. Fabricate a hose connector from 25 thousandths aluminum. Use the hose to verify the correct diameter. Use a hose clamp to hold it in a circle. Drill 2 1/8 inch holes in the connector and pop rivet it together. The hose connector is used to join the two hoses together so that they will reach between the radiator collector and the 3-way fiberglass collector on the floor pan. Route the hose along the bottom of the tub to the 3-way collector. Connect a section of hose from the collector to the plenum and secure with hose clamps. Mount the cabin comfort and fuel shutoff cable on the console as shown. Route the cables so that they do not interfere with any moving parts. The cabin comfort and fuel valve cables can be shortened if desired for better routing. To do this, pull the inner cable into the housing and trim off any excess housing. extend the cable, determine the correct length, and trim the cable. This only applies to the cabin comfort and fuel valve cables. Do not shorten any other cables. Connect a section of hose from the fresh air scoop to this port on the collector. Secure with hose clamps. Connect the cabin comfort cables to the three-way collector as shown. Attach the fuel shutoff cable to the fuel valve filter assembly as shown. The seat back brace tube serves as a stiffener and also helps retain the cyclic fore-aft control cables away from moving parts. Locate the brace to span across the channel in the seat back, where it will most effectively retain the cables. Mount the seat back brace tube to the back of the seat with two 832 screws. Install the clutch engagement handle as shown. Drill a hole through the seat back and install a short piece of hose as a grommet. Use silicone to seal in place. Then lightly grease the clutch engagement handle where it goes through the grommet so it slides freely. Connect the handle to the clutch arm casting with a supplied bolt. Reference construction print E27-2000 and section 12 for more information. Drill a 1/4 inch hole in the tub at a point approximately 5 inches to the pilot side of the front inspection panel and 5 inches from the top edge of the tub. The exact location is not critical. The tube should extend forward 6 inches. Using blade glue, bond the tube in the mount. After the glue is set, insert the pitot tube through the hole in the tub from the inside of the tub using 3 632 screws, washers, and nuts. Bend the tube so that it faces straight forward. Route the plastic tubing from the pitot tube to the fitting on the airspeed indicator.